The lights in the studio burned hot, but the temperature on stage was even hotter. From the very first minute, Denzel Washington's voice cut through the air like a blade. He leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked on Trump, and declared, "You don't get to use Arlington Cemetery as a backdrop for your political stunts. That ground is sacred. It belongs to the fallen, not to your ego." The audience gasped, some clapping in approval, others holding their breath as Trump shifted uncomfortably. Arlington National Cemetery had long been untouchable in the American conscience, an eternal resting place for soldiers who gave everything. To hear Denzel accuse Trump of desecration hit like an earthquake. Trump's face tightened. He raised his hand and fired back, his tone half defensive, half combative. "I honored those soldiers more than anyone ever has. Nobody's done more for veterans than me. Nobody. This is fake outrage, pure Hollywood drama." But Denzel didn't flinch. His voice grew heavier, steadier, like a judge delivering a verdict. Honoring isn't about cameras. It isn't about photo ops. It's about respect. And when you turned that sacred ground into a campaign stage, you crossed a line no real leader would ever cross. The room was electric. Audience members exchanged shocked glances, some whispering about headlines already forming in their minds. This wasn't another scripted spat, it was a clash over America's soul, right in front of millions watching live. The moderator tried to step in, but Denzel's final words of the segment overrode everything. "You think you give strength to the presidency by standing there? No. The presidency gives strength to you. And you failed." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Trump, master of interruptions, struggled to find a quick comeback. Trump finally leaned forward, jabbing his finger in the air like a man cornered. His tone was sharp, filled with fury. "Failed? Nobody has built more respect for our military than me. I rebuilt it, made it strong again. Obama didn't do it, Bush didn't do it, I did it. And Arlington, people loved what I did there. Loved it." But Denzel wasn't moved. His calm was unsettling, almost surgical, cutting through Trump's bombast with precise strikes. He tilted his head slightly and said, "Respect isn't built on vanity projects or parades. Respect is quiet. It's the folded flag handed to a mother who just lost her son. It's the silence of 1,000 graves. You don't turn that into a stage prop." The audience erupted, applause mixed with a low rumble of gasps. Trump's jaw tightened, his lips curled into a sneer. He tried to laugh it off, waving his hand dismissively. "You actors, you love your speeches. Drama, drama, drama. I deal with reality. I gave money, I supported families, I showed up. That's what presidents do." Denzel leaned closer, his voice steady but heavy with accusation. "You showed up with cameras, not compassion. You think checks erase disrespect? You think a stage built over headstones is leadership? You don't understand the difference between serving and self-serving." The studio grew tense. Even the moderator froze, sensing that this exchange had crossed into dangerous territory. For the viewers at home, it was no longer about politics, it was about reverence, memory, and the dignity of sacrifice. And then Denzel delivered the line that made the room fall into pin-drop silence. "When you stand in Arlington, you're standing on the shoulders of the brave. But you treated it like a red carpet. That's not patriotism. That's desecration." Trump opened his mouth, but the words seemed stuck, caught between rage and defense. The camera zoomed in, capturing every twitch of his jaw. Trump finally snapped, his voice rising above the tense silence. "Desecration? That's a disgusting word, Denzel. I've done more for veterans than any president before me. VA reform, funding, ask anyone. You're twisting things to make me look bad. Typical Hollywood smear." The crowd's reaction was mixed, half cheering, half booing. But Denzel didn't flinch. He let Trump's words hang in the air for a moment, then leaned back, eyes locked on him with a calm intensity that felt heavier than shouting. "Hollywood didn't bury those soldiers, Donald. America did. And those families don't want a reality show when they visit their loved ones. They want peace. You couldn't even give them that. Trump tried to interrupt, but the studio audience erupted into applause that drowned him out. The camera cut to faces in the crowd, veterans, parents, young service members, some nodding fiercely, others wiping tears. When the noise subsided, Trump forced a smile, but it looked brittle, cracked under pressure. You don't know what it's like to lead, Denzel. You don't understand the weight, the responsibility. Easy to talk from the sidelines. Denzel shook his head, his voice sharp but deliberate. Leadership isn't about photo ops. It's about humility. You don't drape yourself in the flag to look strong, you carry it so others don't fall. That's the weight you never understood. And that's why you failed them. The tension in the room was unbearable. Trump's face reddened, he clenched the podium as if it were the only thing holding him upright. For a second, he looked less like a commander and more like a man exposed. Then Denzel leaned forward, his words striking like a hammer. You didn't honor the dead, you used them. And America saw it. That's why this moment matters, Donald. Because we remember who treats sacrifice as sacred, and who treats it as spectacle. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Trump pounded the podium, shouting, "Fake. Lies. All lies," but the chants of Denzel drowned him out. Trump's voice cracked as he slammed his hand on the podium. You think you're the voice of America, Denzel? You're an actor. Stick to your movies. You don't know a damn thing about sacrifice. I built this country's strength with my own hands. The words drew sharp laughter from the audience. Denzel tilted his head, raised an eyebrow, and let out a quiet scoff that hit harder than any insult. He leaned into the microphone, his tone steady but razor-sharp. With your own hands? Donald, the only thing you've ever lifted is a pen to sign checks you never paid. Ask the contractors, ask the veterans who waited for benefits while you turned sacred ground into a stage. Gasps cut through the room. Trump's jaw tightened, his finger pointing directly at Denzel. You're twisting facts. You're doing this for clout, for applause. I gave money, I supported vets, Denzel cut him off with the kind of voice that makes silence fall instantly. You gave money when the cameras were rolling. You supported vets when it made you look good. Real sacrifice doesn't come with applause, Donald. It comes with silence. With folded flags handed to mothers who will never see their sons again. That's sacrifice. The crowd erupted. A veteran in uniform stood up, saluting toward Denzel as chants of respect. Respect filled the air. Trump's face flushed a deeper red, his words drowned by the thunder of the room. In a desperate attempt to regain ground, Trump bellowed, I was President of the United States. I had the hardest job in the world. You can't lecture me about duty. Denzel didn't even blink. He leaned forward, his voice low, but carried with weight. The hardest job in the world isn't standing behind a podium, Donald. It's standing at a gravesite, holding a folded flag, trying to explain to a child why their father isn't coming home. That's duty. And that's something you never understood. The audience roared, some on their feet, others pounding their chairs. The camera zoomed in on Trump's trembling hand gripping the edge of the lectern, his attempt at control slipping further away with every second. Trump's chest heaved, his face a mask of rage as he jabbed a finger toward Denzel. You sit there pretending like you care more about this country than I do. You're an actor, not a soldier, not a leader. You don't know what it means to be in charge of a nation under fire. His words echoed, but they felt hollow, more defensive than commanding. The crowd didn't buy it. A murmur swept through the audience, a restless energy that made Trump's voice sound smaller, even as he raised it. Denzel stood tall, not with anger, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew the truth was on his side. He let Trump's rant hang in the air before answering, his tone cutting through like a blade. You're right, Donald, I'm not a soldier. But I've sat with them. I've prayed with them. I've listened when their voices were ignored. You, on the other hand, stood in front of sacred graves and treated it like a photo op. That's not leadership, that's vanity. Gasps tore through the studio. Trump tried to interrupt, but Denzel raised his hand, silencing even him. His voice dropped lower, drawing every ear closer. You want to talk about being in charge? Leadership isn't about ordering people around. It's about shouldering their pain. It's about carrying responsibility without demanding applause. And you, Donald, you ran from responsibility the way you ran from your debts. The words landed like a hammer. Trump's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His shoulders stiffened, his practiced confidence visibly cracking. The audience exploded, some standing, some shouting, many clapping with raw intensity. A group of veterans in the front row shouted together, "Tell the truth." The chant spread like wildfire, filling every corner of the room. Denzel didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. He simply leaned toward the mic and said, with devastating precision, "America doesn't need another showman. It needs honesty. And the truth, Donald, is that you failed them, the soldiers, the families, the very people you swore to honor." The roar that followed drowned out Trump completely. Cameras caught him gripping the lectern with white knuckles, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape. For the first time in the night, the so-called master of the stage looked like a man cornered by reality, and there was no script that could save him. Trump finally snapped. His face turned crimson, and his fist slammed down on the lectern so hard the mic squealed. "You think you can lecture me about loyalty? About sacrifice? I've done more for this country than you ever could. You're nothing but a puppet for the media, living off applause from people who don't know the first thing about leadership." His words spilled out like fire, but the more he shouted, the more desperate he sounded. The studio was tense, every camera zoomed in, every viewer at home leaning forward. Denzel didn't flinch. He folded his arms, watching Trump's fury burn itself out like a man watching a storm he knew would pass. Then, when the silence lingered for just a second, Denzel struck. "Donald, loyalty isn't measured in rallies or ratings. It's measured in respect for those who gave their lives. And you disrespected them. At Arlington, you turned sacred ground into a stage for your ego. That wasn't patriotism, it was a performance. And America saw it." The veterans in the audience erupted, some saluting in defiance of Trump's rant, others shouting, "Shame." The chant built and grew, echoing across the studio until Trump's voice was drowned in it. His mouth moved, but no one was listening. Denzel leaned into the mic, his tone calm but merciless. "You talk about sacrifice, yet you've never sacrificed a thing in your life. Soldiers bled, families mourned, builders you hired went unpaid, and all you did was take more for yourself. You don't carry America's pain, you exploit it." The studio went dead silent, the weight of those words hanging heavy in the air. Trump froze, his bravado collapsing under the piercing truth. For the first time, his signature swagger looked like a mask slipping, leaving nothing but fear behind. And then Denzel delivered the dagger. America doesn't need a man who hides behind flags and slogans. It needs a leader who respects the graves, the builders, and the people who built this nation. And Donald, that man isn't you. The eruption of applause shook the stage, cameras capturing Trump's stunned silence. The so-called showman had been stripped of his script, and in that silence, the truth thundered louder than anything else. The broadcast hadn't even ended when clips of the exchange flooded social media. On Twitter, hashtags like #ArlingtonScandal, #Denzel vs. Trump, and #RespectTheFallen began trending worldwide. Within minutes, millions were watching Denzel's fiery words on loop. America doesn't need a man who hides behind flags and slogans, it needs a leader who respects the graves. On Instagram, veterans shared photos of Arlington with captions, "Denzel said what we've felt for years." TikTok teens edited his words into remixes, setting them over marching drums and military salutes. Even late-night comedians played the clip, freezing on Trump's stunned face and calling it the quietest 30 seconds of his life. Cable news erupted. One network ran a cheerin'. Washington schools Trump on patriotism. Another broadcast a split screen, on one side, Trump's red, furious face, on the other, Denzel's calm, devastating stare. The contrast was viral fuel, rage versus reason, noise versus truth. Trump's allies scrambled to spin it, insisting he was taken out of context. But the damage was done. The image of him slamming his fist while veterans in the audience booed had already cemented itself in the public mind. For every defender he had, 10 more voices rose against him. Meanwhile, Denzel didn't gloat. In interviews afterward, he kept it simple: it wasn't about me. It was about respect. If you can't respect the people who gave everything, you don't deserve to lead. That line alone went viral again, racking up millions of shares within hours. Editorials the next morning painted the confrontation as a turning point. One columnist wrote, "Trump has faced many opponents. But what undid him wasn't a politician, it was an artist who refused to let sacrifice be mocked." The scandal was no longer just about Arlington. It became a referendum on Trump's entire legacy. And for once, he didn't have the louder voice. The following morning, Trump's campaign headquarters looked like a war room under siege. Advisors barked into phones, scrolling through endless feeds of hashtags that refused to die. Hashtag Denzel Truth and hashtag Arlington Respect still dominated every platform. Donations slowed, undecided voters turned cold, and even loyal supporters whispered doubts. One strategist slammed the table: "We need to bury this story, fast." They tried everything: press releases claiming Trump was misrepresented, friendly pundits parroting excuses, and surrogates flooding talk shows with rehearsed outrage. Yet every attempt backfired. Clips of their spin were sliced apart, fact-checked in real time, and reposted with captions like, "More lies, more disrespect." Meanwhile, Denzel said nothing. That silence amplified his power. While Trump's team shouted themselves hoarse, Denzel's calm restraint painted him as the man of dignity, the man who didn't need noise to be heard. A single quote from the night before, "Respect the graves before you wave the flags," was printed on posters, shared in classrooms, even carried on signs outside Arlington itself. In private, Trump fumed. He paced his office, railing against Hollywood phonies and ungrateful vets. But his fury leaked out. A late-night tweetstorm, riddled with typos and half-baked insults at Denzel, only added gasoline to the fire. The public mocked it relentlessly, memeing his words against images of silent gravestones. Pollsters delivered the harsh truth: undecided voters, especially veterans and military families, were moving away from him in droves. For them, the Arlington moment wasn't just a gaffe, it was a betrayal. Trump's campaign had weathered scandals before, but this was different. This wasn't about politics or policy. It was about respect, dignity, and sacrifice, values no spin doctor could twist. Denzel had struck a nerve so deep that even silence became louder than Trump's shouts. And for once, America seemed ready to listen. By the end of that week, political analysts were calling it a seismic shift. What had started as a fiery exchange on live television now reshaped the national conversation. In every diner, classroom, and newsroom, one question echoed: who do we trust with our dignity, someone who mocks, or someone who reminds us what it costs to serve? Trump's allies scrambled, insisting the controversy was manufactured outrage, but the damage was already done. For many Americans, the Arlington scandal wasn't just a soundbite, it became a symbol. A symbol of how far the nation's leadership had drifted from the values people wanted to hold sacred. Meanwhile, Denzel's name surfaced in unexpected places. Community leaders cited him in speeches, veterans posted videos thanking him for speaking when they couldn't, and even pastors quoted his words during sermons: "Respect the graves before you wave the flags." The phrase became a cultural marker, carried beyond the political stage into daily life. Cable news split-screened the two men constantly. On one side, Trump, red-faced and shouting, branding his critics traitors and phonies. On the other, Denzel, calm and unwavering, replayed in a loop with his solemn rebuke. The contrast was striking: chaos versus clarity, noise versus resonance. The fallout bled into polling numbers. For the first time in months, Trump's approval among veterans and their families nosedived. Pundits debated whether this was the moment the narrative cracked, a turning point where even loyal bases reconsidered their stance. And in the midst of it all, Denzel never claimed victory. He didn't tour the talk shows, didn't hold a press conference. He simply let the truth breathe on its own. That silence, measured, intentional, left space for the American people to weigh the insult against the sacrifice. By then, it was clear, this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about honor. And in that arena, Trump was on the losing side of history. The studio lights had long dimmed, but the echo of that confrontation refused to fade. Across America, people weren't just replaying the clash, they were quoting it, tattooing it into memory as if it had carved itself into the nation's conscience. Denzel's words, raw and unscripted, became more than a rebuttal. They became a creed: respect the graves before you wave the flags. For Trump, it was a wound he couldn't stop scratching. Every rally he held, the chant found its way into the crowd. Even his supporters, restless and defensive, grew tired of the shadow it cast. Attempts to drown it out with slogans only made the silence heavier when the question surfaced again: what kind of leader insults the dead? Commentators called it a cultural scar, the moment when entertainment and politics collided so violently that the audience felt they were no longer spectators but witnesses. Memes, headlines, late-night skits, everything pointed back to the same image: Trump raging, Denzel standing firm. The balance of power wasn't measured in applause, but in the weight of truth. And maybe that was the most devastating part for Trump. Not that he had lost a shouting match, but that his opponent hadn't shouted at all. Denzel had spoken with the authority of lived experience, with the calm fury of someone who understood sacrifice. His restraint wasn't weakness, it was strength sharpened into something undeniable. As weeks passed, political historians began to stitch the moment into a larger tapestry. They spoke of McCarthy hearings, Nixon's resignation, and now, this. A televised fracture where the image of power cracked under the pressure of conscience. Trump could deny, deflect, even sue, but the frame had already been set. Denzel had not only called him out, he had sealed the call in history. And as the nation turned the page, one thing was clear: sometimes, a single sentence can outlive 1,000 speeches. Tonight's debate wasn't just about words, it was about truth colliding with power. Denzel's fire, Trump's rage, and the audience's shock turned this stage into a battlefield of ideas. And whether you cheered, booed, or sat frozen in disbelief, one thing is clear: this conversation is far from over. The question now is, whose voice will echo louder when the lights go off? Stay tuned, because history isn't written in silence.